Well, welcome to this week's set of podcasts. We're starting a brand new set for the next 7 days, and it's called Are You a Caleb Leader? And it's a journey into discovering the kind of leadership that stands firm in faith, courage, and conviction. And in the world we live in today, this is quite an important subject. You know, in every generation, there are leaders who follow the crowd, and then there are leaders who follow their calling. And this series explores the life of Caleb, a man whose leadership stood out because he had what scripture calls a different spirit. Numbers 14:24 says, "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land that he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." And today we're going to explore what it means to have a spirit of a different leader. To understand Caleb's leadership, we need to understand the moment that he was living in. The people of Israel had just been delivered from slavery in Egypt. They had witnessed miracles, the Red Sea parting, manna from heaven, and God's presence guiding them through the wilderness. Now they were standing at the edge of the promised land. Moses had selected 12 leaders, one from each tribe, to spy out the land of Canaan. Their mission was simple: explore the land and bring back a report. And for 40 days they travelled through that land. And what they saw was really incredible. They saw a land that was rich and fertile. The fruit was enormous, and scripture even tells us that they carried a cluster of grapes so large it had to be carried by two men on a pole. But they also saw something intimidating. They saw fortified cities, they saw powerful armies, and they saw giants. When the spies returned, they gathered before Moses and the people to give their report. And at first, all 12 spies agreed that the land was indeed good. But then something happened. 10 of the leaders shifted their focus. And instead of talking about the promise of a God, they started talking about the size of the problem. They said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they described themselves as grasshoppers compared to the giants. And fear began to spread across the entire nation. The crowd panicked. But in the middle of that fear filled moment, one voice rose above the noise. And that voice was the voice that belonged to Caleb. In the Bible, it says in Numbers 13:30, "Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, 'We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it.'" Notice something powerful here. Caleb didn't deny the presence of the giants. He simply refused to let the giants define the outcome. While 10 leaders spoke from fear, Caleb spoke from faith. The difference between Caleb and the others was not information, because they all saw the same land, they all saw the same giants, and they all experienced the same journey. The difference was spirit. 10 leaders had a spirit shaped by fear. Caleb had a spirit shaped by faith. And this is why God later called Caleb had a different spirit. A Caleb leader does not ignore reality, but they interpret reality through the promises of God. For others see barriers, they see opportunity, and where others see impossibility, they see potential. And where others say we can't, a Caleb leader says, with God we can. You see, leadership is not about echoing the fear of the crowd. Leadership is about anchoring people in the truth when fear begins to spread. And Caleb understood something that many leaders forget. Faith is contagious, but so is fear. 10 fearful voices caused an entire nation to panic. But Caleb stood as a reminder that one courageous voice can change the atmosphere. One of the hardest moments in leadership is when you must stand against the majority. And Caleb stood alone. Imagine the pressure. Thousands of people were afraid. 10 respected leaders disagreed with him. The crowd was ready to turn back. Yet Caleb remained convinced. Why? Because Caleb's leadership was rooted in conviction, not popularity. A Caleb leader does not measure truth by the size of the crowd. They measure truth by the faithfulness of God. And too many leaders today are shaped by public opinion. They ask, what will people think? What will make everyone comfortable? And what will avoid conflict? But Caleb asked a different question. What did God promise? And what question? And that question changed everything, because when your leadership is rooted in conviction, you don't need approval from the crowd. You only need the assurance of God. And here is the leadership lesson for today. A Caleb leader sees possibility where others see problems. The world is full of leaders who magnify obstacles, but Caleb leaders magnify faith. They remind people that challenges are not the end of the story, and they remind people that God's promises are bigger than the problems that we face. Every generation needs leaders with a different spirit. Leaders who refuse to let fear set the direction. Leaders who speak faith even when it's unpopular. And leaders who trust God's promise more than the visible obstacles. As we close today's episode, here is a question to reflect on. Do you lead with faith or with fear when challenges arise? And when obstacles appear, do you focus on the giants or do you focus on the promise? The spirit of Caleb leader begins with a decision to believe that what God has promised is greater than what stands in the way. And in our next podcast, we'll explore another powerful dimension to Caleb's leadership. Standing alone for what is right. Because sometimes the greatest test in leadership is the courage to stand when everyone else sits down. So until then, ask yourself this question. Are you becoming a Caleb leader?